Thank you all for coming. 7 producers here from 7 of the very best movies that we saw this past year. And it's a great panel, really excited to talk to you guys. Let's just start off a little bit, talk to you a little bit individually each about your movies and how you became involved with them. Since you're right here. Kathleen, Boyhood, obviously 12 years, I think most people know 12 years in the making. In fact, the movie was called at one point 12 years.
Yeah.
And a producer's jobs are many. One of them was for you to realize that you couldn't call it 12 years, right?
Yeah, actually, we were the untitled 12-year project, and when we were trying to come up with a name, we had our little, incorporated company was called Boyhood, so it was always on the call sheet, but we just didn't really know. I mean, the film has so much more to do than just boyhood. You could almost call it motherhood, parenthood. So we were trying to think of a name, and we finally had decided. We were sitting around the kitchen table. We're like, okay, let's call it 12 years. And I pull out my phone, go to IMDb, and I was like, oh no, there's something called 12 Years a Slave. So that was out the window, and we just went back to Boyhood. We figured we'd used it on the call sheet, so we'll just stick with it. And
you began working with this movie not as a producer, but as a production manager, right?
Yeah, I did. And then the next year I moved up into producing. Although I will say that we couldn't really afford a lot of things, so I actually didn't hire a new production manager. I just stayed on doing both roles. So never prove how competent you are at doing 2 jobs, because then you'll end up with 2 jobs. So.
And you mentioned you couldn't afford that. I mean, so each year making this movie, would you just submit like a budget and a synopsis to IFC?
Yep.
Saying...
We didn't have a script, so we couldn't do that. And so we'd submit the synopsis, and we just, we had an agreement really for $200,000 a year, and so that's what we stuck to.
But didn't IFC one year just forget to budget for the movie, or it wasn't on the list and you had to be Rick had to be creative about it?
Well, no, I mean, at one point we did get a loan to cover, but it was...
I'd heard the story that Rick had to use some of his fire insurance money.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And then IFC, well, okay, we'll cover you next year.
Well, IFC evolved from being a production, from producing films to actually distributing, and they kind of their business model changed during the course of, our 12 years. So we were the last film that they actually had on their books that they were funding, so that was interesting.
Yeah, wow. Now, I mean, 12 years, long time, but I mean, a couple other panelists here have also spent multiple years on their movies. Lisa Bruce, again, not 12 years, but it took you and the screenwriter, Anthony McCartan, to, about 8 years to convince Jane Hawking?
If you start when Anthony started and then I joined, it's about a decade, took
wow.
10 years. Yeah, but mostly a lot of that time was just sort of convincing. Jane had written this autobiography about their life together, and she never sort of saw it as a movie, so it was getting her to get to a place where she could really trust that. And then once we had those rights, I met Anthony had been on that journey for about 3 years, and then I came in, and as producers, we really care about rights, so we went for it and spent a lot of energy explaining to her how we would do it and gaining her trust. And then when she signed, then we went off to directors, and pretty quickly James Marsh read it and really sort of flipped over it. He had expected it to be like I sort of expected when I first read it, just a sort of standard biopic focusing mainly on Stephen. And since I had known his public image like everybody else, I was quite surprised by it as well. And then we spent What was nice from a producer's point of view for me was because it took so long to get the rights, I was given sort of that opportunity to work with the screenwriter on the script. Sometimes if a movie happens a little too quickly, you don't get, the chance to really put all those nuances in and really work on the story. So that was actually kind of a nice use of that time. And then when James signed on, then I had worked with Working Title before, and I sent it to the head of the company there, and they loved it and jumped on right away. And then we went to Eddie and Felicity, and then it was quite fast, actually.
Quite fast after the,
Yeah,
he
really,
wrote it
after she signed, it was only about 1 year we were shooting. So it was really very fast then.
And what was her hesitation that took her that long?
Yeah, I think it's kind of crazy to let your personal life be made into a major motion picture, right? It's just crazy. And scary, and maybe we're nice people, but then when we go to get the money, aren't they going to be awful people, or isn't somebody going to make fun of Stephen, or, represent us in a way that isn't truthful? And what was really interesting about that process, and Working Title was quite helpful in this because they've made so many films about real life stories, we kept trying to frame it as we're trying to tell the truth of your emotional life, not the exact literal thing you said or the sweater you wore or which side your hair was parted on, because sometimes people, when it's their life, they can get very focused in the literal details, and because you're taking, in our story, we were taking about 28 years and putting it into a 2-hour film, so it's really more important in a way. It's almost like a poem representing someone's life, and so we were just trying to represent the truth of their journey on an emotional level. And I think once Jane sort of started to see it that way, it was easier for her to let go of certain things, because otherwise you can spend hours talking about, I said that in the kitchen, not in the dining room, and it just can be crazy.
And with Foxcatcher, John, this was another multiple year long journey. This was a movie Ben Miller was going to make before Moneyball, right?
Oh, yeah. Many years before. It started in a very kind of casual, informal way. We just sat down in his apartment and we started talking about making a movie together. We didn't know what it was going to be, and there were a couple ideas he had, a few things that he was thinking about starting to develop, and kicked those around, and then this one came up as an article he had read, he had been given, and we decided that let's put the time and energy into that and start to find writers and do the research and go through the years of getting to know the story. This wasn't a book. It didn't exist in any other form. Although the lives and the story itself was true, we had to create it, and very much like Lisa was saying, it becomes the director's portrait of these people. And I think a lot's been talked about recently, the details and the exact conversations that took place. And these are all artists. These are directors making their version of these stories. And I think it's just as important to remember that than the accuracy in every detail, because you're getting, their version of these people's lives. Or you've got to make an emotional, impact or a dramatic impact, and you have to take some liberty sometimes to do that in a 2-hour period. But Foxcatcher took many years of development and the frustration of trying to find the money, and we both went off and did other things in the meantime and kept coming back to this. We just couldn't drop it, couldn't forget it, and then finally with the help of Megan Ellison, we were able to make it happen, and with her we found the partner that was not just financial but creative, who really made the movie work.
Yeah, and a real commitment to making the best movie, because this was a movie that was going to come out at AFI in 2013.
Exactly.
And the decision was made that, well, it's not quite the best movie that we think it can be.
Very true.
That was a bold decision as a producer to push it back a year.
Yeah. It was good, and we were accepted at festivals like that one, but it wasn't finished. We felt that there was more work to do, and it's a very delicate creation.
I think Bennett's still working on it now.
Yeah, I think so.
In his mind, he is, yes.
The rewrite continued all the way through the edit, through the mix. After we premiered it at Cannes, we did a little more work on it, but we're done. And we're very happy and proud, but it wasn't until we felt that way about the movie could we breathe, and relax and enjoy it.
So you're saying the DVD release will not be yet another...
No, this is it.
New one.
And,
Okay. Now, three of you have very long-standing relationships with the directors that you've made these movies with. Robert, you began working with Clint Eastwood, right, as an assistant director on Bridges of Madison County.
That's right.
How did that...
I met my wife.
Yeah. So great on all counts.
Yeah,
there, yeah. How did that evolve into starting to produce his movies, three of which have gone on to be Best Picture nominees now?
We just have a easy working style collaboration. We both just think about it as filmmaking and not necessarily who does what, and that's kind of the spirit he encourages from everybody on his crew. Is just we all get together and just make the movie, and it's not about whose job is what. So, and he just appreciated, I think, that attitude in me, and he just kept asking me to do more and more, and ended up being with him now for 20 years.
Wow. I mean, is that something that you could have envisioned at that early point?
No, not at all. I was intent on directing, and I was telling Teddy earlier, I feel like Al Pacino, because he just keeps pulling me back in. Every time I try to go do something else, he asks me to come back and do another one.
But you did get a chance to direct with Clint, which I think you were the only person other than In the Line of Fire, right?
Only person crazy enough to try and direct him, yes.
Now, I mean, he came on board American Sniper after Steven Spielberg was attached to direct this movie.
Right. I feel guilty listening to these stories about how long everybody took to make theirs, because it was just over a year ago that we started on this.
All right, he's like the opposite of
I think
this.
Clint made 3 movies in the time we edited ours.
Yeah, I mean, he came, I don't know, I mean, Spielberg, it was announced that he dropped out in August of 2013. When I spoke to Eastwood, earlier this month, I mean, we were talking about, he was reading the book when Warner Brothers called and said, well, let me finish the book. And he did quickly and signed on board quickly, and then March 31st, well, then you meet the family, right?
Right, yeah. Actually, I was in Morocco scouting locations, but he went down with Bradley to meet the family.
Yeah.
And it was fast.
So, I mean, I guess...
We were finishing another project at the time. Actually, we were just about to shoot another project, and I read in the trades that Spielberg had dropped out, and it was later that day the studio called and said, could we come over and talk to you guys? And they came the next day. We kind of had a feeling what it might be about.
Yeah. So, I mean, working with Clint Eastwood, that's something it's a well-oiled machine, but you need to be able, and everybody is, just they know how he works.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I think it was material that seemed appropriate for Clint, but also I think that was part of why the studio called us so quickly, because they knew that it was something they wanted to get moving on, and they knew that we could pick it up and run with it.
Now, John, you've known Alejandro González Iñárritu since you were his agent.
That's correct. Yeah, I've known Alejandro for 12 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah, he made this really remarkable film called Amores Perros I saw in Cannes, and just wanted to sign. Everyone in Hollywood wanted to sign him. It wasn't a secret, but I won the sweepstakes, and he's been my friend ever since.
And does
15 years.
Okay, 15 years, sorry. I'm bad with math. And Killick produced, Mr. Killick here produced with him too, so we're brothers here on working with Alejandro.
And does knowing him for that long of a period really help you kind of translate his vision, his ideas onto the screen? I mean, you have a...
To work with Alejandro is just like, it's like the weather, it's a force of nature. You have to just kind of love everything, and you have to just go with his instincts and there's no real producing him. There's more just riding this incredible wave of creativity and determination that he infects you with. And, there's really no way to possibly describe it. It's just every day is its own ups and downs and incredible journey. And I just love him so much. And, knowing him really well has helped, because it is helpful to have people who you trust, who you're like brothers with, so that even if something bad happens or you're fighting or whatever, there's trust and love. So I know we have that.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of challenges with this Birdman shoot. I mean, there's the very unique way that Alejandro decided to shoot the film. You were making it in a Broadway theater for, how many days?
I mean, I read the script, and the first thing he said is, "Cabron, it's in one long shot." I'm like, okay. And he's like, and then he kept saying, I'm like, what is it? He kept saying, it's like a Mexican guacamole cappuccino sushi. It's great. And then I noticed, I said, oh, there's this Raymond Carver thing, and I said, do we have the rights to the Raymond Carver thing? He's like, no. I'm like, okay. So there were a lot of, and then yes, Broadway is a challenge. Most of us hadn't worked in Broadway, but one of our writers had done a bunch of Broadway, and we hung out in a lot of Broadway theaters. That ended up being kind of a challenging, logistically while we were shooting, but not really a creative challenge.
Right. I mean, and there's ways to plan for that.
Yeah, everyone kept saying, why don't you shoot in a non-Broadway theater? But when you actually go look at Broadway theaters, and there's just really nothing that comes close to the intimacy and grandeur, and also just like what a Broadway theater is. Just they don't look the same other places. And then we've, of course, had the Michael Keaton, who's here right now, and this movie would not exist without that man right there, Michael Keaton.
And as you say, logistically, there's ways to plan for all these things. And there's probably even a way to plan a little bit for shooting Michael Keaton in his underwear in Times Square in the middle of the night.
That was one of the things we didn't really plan that well. Yeah. Alejandro kept saying, we're going to make this film we'll do it in reverse. Like it's like a song we'll take on the road, and then when we figure out how to play it, we'll go into the studio and record the song. So we shot the movie. We rehearsed for 8 weeks, 9 weeks, and then in LA and in New York with stand-ins and with our real actors, and then we shot the movie in 29 days. And the only reason we were able to do that is because of the amazing amount of rehearsal. But something like the Times Square thing was definitely challenging. And it's on the day it's raining, and he's in his underwear, and there's all these extras, but not enough, and real people. You can't shut down Times Square. You can't do a lockdown on Times Square. So it's sort of like going with. And when we were sort of rehearsing how we were going to shoot it, Chris Harhoff, who is our Steadicam operator, ran into some Japanese couple in Times Square. They were just running through, and so we tried to figure out. Alejandro and Chivo came up with this amazing strategy of using this marching band that they found to kind of distract everyone, and then using our extras and stand-ins to kind of clear a path for Michael as he was running.
Yeah, I love the marching band. I mean, which seems organic, but it was a distraction it was funny.
Well, it's also because of the whole rhythmic, and we had no money for anything. So when people were saying, well, this line item where you have no money in for music, how's that going to work? And Alejandro's like, it's going to be drums. But I thought, I didn't think that we were really actually going to use drums, but.
Now, Jeremy, you've worked with Wes Anderson, beginning collaborating with him on The Life Aquatic as visual effects, right?
Yeah, I just want to make sure it doesn't say interstellar down here, because I don't know if anyone noticed that. I can wing it about the fifth dimension if need be. I started in visual effects, but I was sort of like a, not your typical visual effects guy. I'd worked with Darren Aronofsky, and I made up how to do visual effects by myself. So when Life Aquatic came around, I had an interview with Wes, and he brought me in, and he said, we have all this underwater stuff, and we don't know how to do it. And I want to use stop motion animation, and so I kind of dove into it, and suddenly I was like in Italy, and they're out on a boat in the Mediterranean shooting, and I'm left at Cinecittà not speaking Italian, trying to wrangle all this stuff, and I kind of had to learn Italian and figure out how to get everything done. And I think, Wes sort of saw that, and he said, okay, here's a guy who can help me get the things done, and figured it out, and I sort of accidentally became a producer, which made, you guys know.
So that's how you transitioned, like, for his next movie, Darjeeling Limited, you were co-producer on that, and you've been with him ever since.
Yeah, actually what happened is, he said, I'm doing a stop motion movie next. Now we know how to do this. We'd done like 5 stop motion shots, and the other movie was like, yeah, cool. And we went out and made Mr. Fox and Darjeeling sort of simultaneous, and I was in ever since.
Now, and are his productions pretty streamlined in terms of he's working with people that he's worked with a lot before?
Yeah.
And so you can kind of, they're so intricate, there's so much detail in these things, and yet, the set stops, the second the camera.
Yeah, we definitely, I think everybody here knows, like, part of the reason you end up working with the same people over and over again is every director, especially if you've got somebody with who's got their own artistic vision, if you've got people who can kind of help you devise your way of making movies, the movie's going to go a lot better and be a lot more efficient, and you're going to get the movie on the screen, and you're not going to waste half a day doing something you didn't want to do. So we actually did that, probably similar a little bit to what they did on Birdman, which Birdman you understand why, but for Wes, we took techniques we've learned through stop motion animation, and we storyboarded and animatic the entire film with an audio track. So that we had it all edited together and knew everything we wanted. And then as we'd go location scouting and finding places to work, we decided, Wes, we sort of developed this idea that if a location is more than 10 minutes away from like where you're staying, it's going to just create a problem, because then you can't go there 17 times before you shoot it, and you can't go at the end of the day and check it out. So we start gathering everything in this very small location sphere, and just trying to find these places, and then we'll go visit them over prep, and we'll shoot everything in advance, either with stand-ins or, sometimes on video, sometimes on film, map everything out. When we have a location locked, we will then have our storyboard guys like redraw it so that we know exactly what's going to be in the frame, and then when we dress and build the sets, we just literally build them, as you said, that far. And because that, if you've built a backside of a set that you're never going to see, that's a waste of money and resources, and that wasn't something that was going to work, because when we got the script, it was so ridiculously ambitious when I saw the script and kind of knew the scale we'd be working in, that it was terrifying. And it was like this ski chase sequence was the only thing we didn't figure out in advance, and for that we literally had a line item in the budget that just said Alpine. And then whatever, I won't even say the amount of money. And it was about a third of the way through the shoot before we actually figured out what we were going to do with that one, when Wes just said, let's just do it with animation. We're never going to be as good as the James Bond guys. And so we decided to animate and build that, and that's where my visual effects experience came back in, because with the models and miniatures and stuff we've been doing since Mr. Fox and Life Aquatic, I kind of got sucked into that world, and it was fun. It made it work.
And Teddy, with Imitation Game, Graham Moore's script, very hot property. You tried to bid on it when it went up, and you did bid on it, but Warner Brothers got it initially, right?
Yes.
So, but they had a year to make it and did not, so you did not, you succeeded the second time around.
Yes, I'm a great second option. No, I think that quality scripts can end up at studios, they can end up being made independently, and this was a piece of material that was much lauded because people didn't understand Alan Turing's story. It was written in what at least I thought was a very moving and compelling way, told with 3 different time periods intercutting throughout, And it was just one of those stories, and all of us on the stage, read thousands of scripts a year, and every once in a while you find one, despite the fact that I'm not a mathematician, I'm not gay, I'm not British, I'm not even good at computers, that really spoke to me, and just felt torn to make. And I tried very hard the first time and couldn't get in the room with the writer. And, a year later, the script became available. And, I had a chance to sit down with him and his producing partners and really pitch a way to make the movie. And I think that sometimes people can get caught up with, I don't want to say hype, but they can get caught up with the system of Hollywood, especially, when they're just starting out, and, people like Leonardo DiCaprio were pitched as playing Alan Turing, and, you have to recognize what's organic to the material, and what's the right way to tell this particular story, and trust that those elements are really going to come together in a way that has a greater impact than whatever buzz you might be hearing. So somehow or another that speech worked, and they agreed to partner up with me, and we put the project together from scratch again. And we, as 3 American producers and an American writer telling a very British story, our intention was to then go and find a British director, because that felt like at least we would have some credibility in telling this story. And it just happened that during Hurricane Sandy in New York, I was relocated to some temp office space, and we didn't have phones, so I could just watch everything on Netflix, just sort of trying to find our director, and I came across Headhunters, Morton Tildum's previous film, and it's probably not what you would look at and say, it's a Scandinavian screwball thriller comedy that's just completely out there, and I think they kill a dog in it. Like, it's not apples to apples, but he was just so talented, and there were so many different tones in that film. And I think within our film, we have a period drama, we have a couple different types of love. There's a platonic love, there's a first love, there's a love of truth, of knowledge, and there's a deep emotional core to the story. And yet at the same time, it's also, the beginnings through the height of World War II, and there is a race against time, and, and a mystery as we sort of unravel the layers of this story. And we wanted to find a director who could hopefully bring a sense, a sense of all of those emotions coming together in a way that felt organic, which was hard to do, and avoid being, sort of masterpiece theater. Whether we succeeded or not, I don't know. But that was the intention. And then once we partnered with Morton, it really took off from there. Benedict Cumberbatch came to us and said, I know this story. I understand this man. I want to play this role if you're willing to have us. And I don't think because our director was Norwegian that he fully understood what Benedict was saying. So he kept trying to pitch Benedict at the same time. And I think they hung up, thinking it was a bad call because they just spoke past each other. But he came on from there, and Keira Knightley did the same thing, just saying, I understand the importance of Joan Clark. I know that relationship. I heard, Prime Minister Gordon Brown's apology in 2009, and the story has real resonance within the UK and hopefully past there. And we were very lucky. Like, we've all put together a lot of films where you're begging and borrowing and stealing to try to get people to be a part of it, and we had the reverse experience on this one.
Now, you mentioned something about sort of protecting this movie and sort of shielding it from the system. I mean, let's maybe go into that idea.
Sure.
We've got Wes Anderson, Iñárritu, Eastwood, Ben Miller, Richard Linklater, James Marsh is an Oscar winner for Man on Wire, the documentary. Morton Tildum, now an Oscar nominee. So you've got, as a producer, I mean, does the word no exist in your vocabulary? I mean, do you say no to these guys, or is it a case of sometimes maybe just rephrasing something and asking why?
Is that still to me?
That can be, that's to everyone here.
I like to use the phrase, how about?
Yeah.
Instead of no. You're like, pause, how about? And,
Really good idea, but have you thought about?
But I would say that, you end up in this situation where, and a lot of these guys also, who are directors, and these are also producers on numerous number of these films, and I think it's because they all understand, like, to be an auteur and to be a really, creative filmmaker, you also have to be responsible. If you're sort of a runaway train wreck, and, that's going to make it less and less possible to make your movies. And I think, like, someone like Wes is, he'll try and suggest another idea, and he'll, usually flip it around and come up with some crazy curveball from another side, but trying to address the problem. And I think, if you're honest and you're in the room and you've got a team that can really dodge and move and you prepare well, you can kind of get around those no's.
I think it's also about, I'm sorry. I think it's also about, where are the asks coming from, and what is everybody trying to achieve? I think that all of us make these films, because we care about the underlying material, we care about our directors, we care about creating the best product. So, sometimes things aren't financially possible, but if they're coming from a creative ask that makes sense for the film, everybody wants to find a way to achieve that, and then it's just a question of what do you have to give up, and how pressing is whatever the individual ask is. But I think it's just part of the job.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think the word is no, it's more how, and you're problem solving together, you're figuring it out together. If it's something that's asked, there's usually a reason for it, and even if it hasn't existed before, the job is to figure out how to get it done.
But yeah, I mean, with all these movies, time is tight, money is tight, so yeah, you're going to have to.
But all these filmmakers understand that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, they might pretend not to at a given moment, but they really do.
Yeah.
I think you have to mix in all of this, though. There's always it's so interesting to talk about it on a panel, and then we all have the memory, I'm sure, on every single movie. There's always this exhaustion level, too. Like, James, our director, was having like 6 or 7 espressos a day, and there's just a point where your adrenal glands start to give out. And, if you haven't slept the night before because of a scene that you're doing that day, or the actors, so there's all that rhythm that affects it all. So it is, I find as a producer, you really have to be very good about the timing. It's sort of like you're dancing with somebody, and you have to make the move at a time when they can hear it, not at a time when an actor maybe has just downloaded on them about something, or there's the hugest scene of the movie they're about to shoot. And so I feel like a lot of it is the rhythm of knowing when and how to say things.
And in Theory of Everything, James, I think, ideally would have liked to have shot the movie in sequence.
Right.
But, when you're making this movie, and you have, more than 100 locations, right?
Well, I would say we had about 50 physical locations, but then inside that, rooms and stuff, sure, there are about 100. And also because it was an interesting journey for James, because he's mostly made documentaries, and Man on Wire was very much his world, and he was able to create that a piece at a time. And he had done a narrative film called Shadow Dancer with Clive Owen and Andrea Riceborough, but it was Irish Film Board. And so it was also unlike our movie, where we're working title and then Universal's behind it, and there are, just besides myself and Anthony the writer and Eddie coming up with ideas, Eddie our actor, as well as Felicity, the studio has some notes at times, and that was a new journey for him, for sure, because he at one point said, making a documentary is like you get to ride your own bicycle down the street, but when you make a, feature film with all these people, it's sort of like there's this whole bus, and everybody's getting on the bus with you, and so I think it was that journey of sort of learning to appreciate that. And I do think that the give and take and struggling with ideas and disagreeing actually usually makes for a better movie.
Mm-hmm. And, Jeremy, you mentioned the Alpine scene. Yeah. John, you were talking about the marching band there in Times Square. When you're dealing with limits, creativity can come out of it, right?
Definitely.
We didn't know how we were going to shoot there were a lot of things we didn't figure out how to shoot, like how we were going to make Birdman fly through the air and stuff like that, and we wanted to make it look really cool, but we didn't have the budget to do it. I often think limits create creativity, and So it's not someone saying no, it's more like, this is all we have, so how do we make it work?
And I also think sometimes you take a risk that's almost like, I know Wes sometimes, he kind of likes to take, there's a little bit of a thrill factor to like, let's do something a little bit crazy here.
Yeah.
And it might be like, there's a train station, there's a shot in Grand Budapest where they're going to this train station, and we could never find it. We went to like every train station, within, our zone radius, so we just kept driving around looking at every little train station. We couldn't find one. We found this little overpass bridge, and he's like, well, let's just make a train station up there. And they go, well, how's the train going to show up? He's like, well, we could just make like a nose of a train out of cardboard. I'm like, okay, so Adam and Wes got to figure it out. There's a scene where Bill Murray drops off in the car and they run up, and we literally had a cardboard flat train that we were like pushing it on a dolly with a smoke machine behind it. And nobody like none of you guys noticed it. I still think it's a train. So that kind of stuff, it costs, nothing, but, and it was more fun, and we get to kind of, enjoy it, tickled by the fact that we did it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Kathleen, with Boyhood, the movie ends so perfectly, so beautifully. You're out in that natural setting, the sun's going down, he has that beautiful moment, little philosophical, it's just kind of but originally that was going to be filmed in a national park, right? A completely different place.
Yeah, we were out in West Texas, and if you've never been out there, it's just, it's a gorgeous place to go. But Rick and I had already gone out and we'd scouted Big Bend National Park, and we're all set to, I had this party bus lined up because, got all my crew on the bus. We all drove out there together. And it was a couple of days before we were leaving, and the government shut down. Our own senator, obviously, Ted Cruz, shut down our government. So we we didn't really know what we were going to do. We got on the bus anyway. We drove out there, and just sort of like, hey, you got 30 minutes? Let's go run down over to this, and go drive down these canyons and try and find a new location. So the state park took us in. They were really nice about it.
Yeah.
but yeah, like you were talking about like supporting your director, and Rick's a really great producing partner because he's just easygoing. He's easy to get along with, and I think I'd actually kind of maybe beaten him down so much on the money during the filming of it that when we came to the end, there's the shot where you see him driving in the car when the hero song comes up, and I had said, don't you want something for the end of the film? Like, I kind of tucked some little bit of money away, and I was like, let me just give you something, by the end of this, whole process. And, he's like, no, I'm good. And about 2 weeks later, he's like, how you were asking if I wanted anything? He was like, yeah, can I have a helicopter? I was like, great, okay, yeah, I'll get you a helicopter. So.
You're almost happy that he asked, yeah. Well, we've mentioned a little bit. There have been this time of year, there are a lot of biopics, a lot of fact-based movies that come out. And then right after that, there's usually an intense amount of scrutiny of these movies from historians, from, people who were there, film critics. What responsibility, maybe you guys can talk about this as filmmakers, what responsibility do you have to the actual events versus the art that the director is being created?
I think it's a balance, to be honest. If you're trying to give people an insight into something they previously don't know about, and it's a period of time, and there's historical figures and real events that help shape, our society, then you want to try to depict those as accurately as you can, while at the same time capturing or at least we wanted to depict them. You don't necessarily have to, but we wanted to try and depict them as accurately as we could, while at the same time, if you're condensing so many years, if you're condensing so many different activities, you have to find a way for it all to be intertwined and create the feeling, atmosphere, and spirit of that period, which necessarily leads to, some consolidation, some, just some gives where, for instance, in our film, we've taken flack for, the machine that Alan Turing built was called the bomb, and it was clearly called the bomb. Everyone knew it was called the bomb, but in our film, we call it Christopher, because Christopher Morcom was his closest friend, his first love, and when he passed away, that was, the hardest thing for him, and really formative in his professional career and his emotional development. And he wrote more letters to Christopher Morcom's mother after that time than to anybody else in the world, and all about his work and trying to create and carry on Christopher's spirit. So while the machine itself wasn't named Christopher, it very much, both that work and his later work in computing was tied to a concept of artificial intelligence, of keeping a spirit alive, of being able to find a mechanical way to do that. So we're happy to call that machine Christopher, because it really embodies something that we wanted to express. But it's definitely a delicate balance.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting to an emotional truth there versus historical fact. And I think that's probably a big thing of what all these movies are doing, right? John, you're like leaning over the microphone.
Well, I think what we all share is we're working with auteur directors and we're supporting their vision. And I don't want to work with a director unless he's got a real clear point of view, even about a factual, historically accurate story. It's still going to be interpreted by that person. With our film, Mark Schultz is still alive, Nancy Schultz, Dave's widow, the children. We talked to all of them, did a lot of research with people who were there. The DuPont family obviously had a point of view on it too. We didn't spend much time or didn't have much access to them, but we told everybody from the beginning, this isn't going to be your story. It's going to be Bennett's story. It's going to be Bennett's version of what happened here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as Lisa said earlier, it's got to be really weird when a movie comes out about your life. And I think Mark had a social media reaction to that, still kind of wrapping his head around that, right?
Yeah, and Mark was very helpful, involved throughout the process, not just as research and interviews, but on the set, working with Channing. But yeah, certain things are not going to be exactly, it's a warts and all telling of the story, and people see themselves maybe a little bit more heroic than in this case than we wanted to show, and there's another side to it, and there's some nuances to it that we felt were necessary.
In the case of Theory of Everything, it was based originally on Jane's autobiography. Then we involved Stephen, and then we involved all their three kids. And it's so interesting when you talk about fact or historical fact, or even, if you talk to your own family members. I mean, every sibling I have has a different version of the same event we were all in. Yeah. And then as we get older, it changes even more and keeps mutating. So it was interesting working with a family who all had different perspectives of the way things happened. So it's sort of, in a way, as more of them became involved, it gave us a little more freedom with it because they had different perspectives. But I as a producer, I was sort of worried when they were on set at times, and we were shooting the May Ball, which is an early on scene, and when Stephen and Jane are dating. And, we're going to do fireworks that night, and they're all dressed up, and it's beautiful. And Tim, the youngest son, was there, and, he's well into his 30s, and it was one of our first nights of shooting. So I had this energy thinking how weird it must be for these kids to be standing there watching, another person play their father or their mother. And I saw Tim sort of seemingly having a bit of an odd face as he was watching. So I went over, codependent as I am, and said, oh, this must be kind of surreal, right? Seeing Eddie Redmayne, he really isn't your dad, play your dad. And it was such a moving moment because since he was the youngest son, by the time he was born, he never knew or ever saw his father walk. And so he said, no, I'm having a moment where I just never even thought of him as an able-bodied man. And he was watching, Eddie make his way down this hill and stumble down the hill and, take her to dance. And it was so moving. And he was so moved by it. And the kids had more struggle with our story being told because they would say, I thought it was going to be the same thing many of us worry about, oh, you remember it this way and it was that way. They all struggle with it because they said, as a kid, you never think of your parents dating. Their life starts when we were born. So that was so interesting to me because we had worried about so many other things, and that was quite a big emotional journey for them.
Robert, do you have any thoughts on this with American Sniper?
Yeah, Chris is a pretty controversial figure, and I think all of us agreed when we were making the movie that the story we were trying to tell was a soldier's story and what a soldier goes through and their family go through. So that sort of guided what elements of his life were included in the movie, because we wanted him to sort of represent that story, and that's, I've done a lot of movies about historical events, and that's really what you look for is, that human emotion that everyone can connect to in order to understand another person's experience and understand their world a little bit more.
Yeah, and that seems to be obviously connecting with a lot of people, including people who have served. I was talking to, just after the writers panel, to Jason, the screenwriter, and he said he has received a lot of letters from people.
Yeah, he's got a lot of Facebook requests, which he keeps answering for some reason. But yeah, there's a lot of veterans and wives of veterans that have contacted him and told him how one woman, I remember he mentioned, said her husband came home from Vietnam and was abusive, and they'd had a really rough time, and after seeing this movie, it was the first time he opened up to talk about what had happened to him when he was there in Vietnam, and it said it changed everything about their marriage and their life.
Wow. Do you think that all this kind of intense scrutiny will give producers, filmmakers, any kind of reservation about telling these stories in the future? Or?
Not after you see what the box office was.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of feel like with a movie, and whenever you're making a movie, it's inspired by real events. It's our interpretation of real events. It's a little bit what John was saying. It's like it's our point of view, and it's ultimately, no matter what you do, you're not telling a truth. It's not a documentary. You're making a movie, and so there's things that when you're finding. I know when I'm developing stories or I'm trying to find stories, so you try to find what truths are we going to stick to and hold true to those, and really make those decisions, and then we're making things up. You end up making a lot of things up to tell them to make a movie. So we hope people also understand that. Mm-hmm. I know it's hard especially when you're dealing with real people. It's really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing just I wanted to point out about Grand Budapest is it's full of historical events, but it's completely fictionalized, and that's maybe a bit of a dodge. You're not used to, or can avoid the controversy. But I think that we did a lot of research, read a lot of, Stefan Zweig was an inspiration for the movie, and the whole idea that, Wes has spent many years living in Europe, and I think he really wanted to have a story that captured what happened to Europe in the 20th century, and this idea that it was this place of promise and glamour, and, you think of Paris in the 20s, and then it went through these wars, 2 different wars, and it went through communism and this sort of crushed spirit and lost opportunity and the Holocaust, and all those things are kind of themes that are in Grand Budapest, even though it's ostensibly a comedy, but they're really, that poignancy and that feeling is in there, and, it allowed us to kind of mesh World War I and World War II and mix and match, because we had it in a fictional world, but we still tried to kind of deal with historical, real events and themes.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, and because I had forgotten, even then you caught flack for the way you did that, right? I mean, the thing is that you can't, in like Imitation Game, some people were upset that there was no explicit love scene with Benedict, and it's like people want the movie that they are envisioning in their own heads, but you've got people making the movie that they're envisioning in their heads.
Well, you can't blame all those Cumber Cumberbatches. I just want to see Benedict.
Yeah.
I just work with Benedict. He's amazing. He's got this whole fan base.
Yeah.
No, he does. He does. Yeah, look, I think that, I think we all pour a lot of ourselves into these films, and you have to have thick skin. You have to be prepared for people to criticize, to push, to pull, to pick. I think that whether it's Imitation Game or any of these other films, there's unfortunately a business that's out there of trying to nitpick for the sake of getting clicks, and driving advertising revenue, and that's journalism. And I think some of it is worthwhile because I think people have a right to know. But I think that, echoing what John has said, I think films should be viewed, for what they are, and the fact that we made what we thought was a very powerful gay love story, with someone who's driven by their relationship with a boy from a very early age, and that guides his work and professional life, and people just want to see him having sex as an adult, felt to us rather base. But at the same time, people are going to have their own concepts of how to make a movie, and
it's
that
a
is
very
what it is.
personal journey. I think for every filmmaker, especially when you spend years making your film, so much of you goes on that screen. I mean, there's so much of Clint Eastwood in Chris Kyle's story. Bennett made his version of Capote. Someone else made their version of Capote. The Steven Spielberg version or the Michael Moore version of American Sniper would be very different from Clint's. So when you... It's a very personal process, and it's an art form. These are not documentaries, and we all, support the artists who we partner with.
But even with a documentary, right, as soon as you decide where you're putting the camera and where you aim it and when you cut the scene and what sound you add in, it's all perspective. You've already changed the reality.
Sure, whatever part of the interview you chose to include,
Right.
Whatever you chose not to include, yeah, exactly. Oscars are 3 weeks from tomorrow. Capping. What's that?
What are those?
But it's the thing at the end of a lot of awards being given. Some people are like awards fatigue, too many awards. I was kind of wondering how important are the Oscars and all the attention the Oscars receive? How important is that to these kinds of movies maybe being made?
You're up, Kathleen.
Hey, we made, this sort of, I don't know, really low-budget, epic film, and it's, and it's unique, and it was a real risk doing it, and who knew at the end of it if all that time and energy and effort and, everything that we did was going to, pay off in the end, and the film that we were going to produce and hand to people to see, were they going to like it? Or, were they going to get anything out of it? Was it going to be a gift to them, or, was the whole thing, for naught? So, yeah, it was a big risk, and you look at something like that and you think, wow, we're actually going to be at the Oscars. Like this film, is at the Oscars, and I mean, to me, I hope that it does encourage people to just keep on making whatever kind of story that they want to make, and telling good stories and making good films, because Lord knows, it's hard to get a movie done of any kind, any shape or form. So, more power to you.
Yeah, that's what I think too. It's like if the go for broke personal filmmaking gets attention and gets people to see it and trust their own instincts to make another movie, and gets people to watch these movies because they're getting awards, then that's great for the business too, because there's, it's really hard to get these movies made. So the Oscars give a little platform for these movies, or all movies, and if it helps anyone else have the courage to just not give up and make their movie, that to me is the best thing that can happen out of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, good point. I was gonna say that, at some point someone said, other than American Sniper, Grand Budapest was like the highest grossing Oscar nominees. To me, that was crazy because we're always like the little guys as far as I'm concerned. And,
Not anymore, Jeremy.
well, yeah, here we are, big time. But what I thought was, the one thing that it's obviously amazing, and I think that, we had this weird thing of putting our movie out so early in the year because we wanted to put it out in a time where like there weren't 1,000 movies we were competing with, and it obviously worked, but I don't know how it could work, but I sort of feel like if all these little movies could be spread among the year and still, this attention and the box office that you get from being nominated could be part of the picture, that would be amazing, because a lot of people, I know a lot of people out here, you get the end of the year and suddenly you have to see 15 of the best movies made all year, all in a couple of weeks, and you miss some, or you rush them, or you don't go to the theater, and I don't know, how that works in the system, but it would be.
But Boyhood was in Sundance.
Yeah.
Whiplash was at Sundance, and you guys were at Berlin, and
Yeah.
you guys were at Cannes. So a lot of these movies kind of were, yeah.
But then, they ended up,
release
most of them
later.
on the release schedule.
Most
Yeah,
of them.
that's what I was.
And I remember when Budapest came out, it's the most commercially successful of any of Wes Anderson's movies, and it was huge worldwide. And I just got the sense that when it came out in March, that audiences were hungry for like a grown-up movie. That there was this, underserved segment of moviegoers that were saying, "Cool, there's a movie to see."
Yeah, I think if everybody just went to the theater like every 2 weeks, it would be amazing. Like they're going back to these theaters. Look at rooms like this.
As the only non-Best Picture nominee up here,
I was going to bring that up, actually.
I could just...
I'm glad you brought it up, because I felt awkward.
I will just speak to the fact that it is not the be-all and end-all.
But then it was nominated.
And it's following, at least for me, a great tradition of movies like Do the Right Thing, Diving Bell and the Butterfly, and Dead Man Walking, that I haven't gotten nominated for Best Picture. But the films have lived on, and I hope that Foxcatcher follows that tradition. You just have to make a good movie and hope that it lasts.
Right.
Here, here.
Yeah.
And as John mentioned, Bennett Miller was nominated for director, Steve Carell for lead actor, Mark Ruffalo supporting actor. A lot of love for that movie. I guess I was just wondering.
We love you, John. We love you, John.
But that the Oscars are kind of, Hollywood doesn't seem to be interested in making, huge slates of these types of movies anymore. So it's like the Oscars are kind of the carrot there for the studios to like occasionally dip their toe into that water.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if you eliminated all this whole award season, we'd all get a lot more sleep, but you wouldn't, I think certain movies wouldn't get the same kind of green light that they get. Either it'd be less money, or it'd be even a harder mountain to climb, I think, to get them made.
So actors get the glamour, directors get all the credit. So what do producers get?
We get the Santa Barbara panel. It's really